The lady speaker in the panel, Ms. Salome Kaiba from PwC Kenya. A warm round of applause for that panelist. Maybe the team can help me remove the dais. So Salome is, just so that I can, let me tell you about the panelists that we have here. So Salome is an associate director at PwC Kenya with over 13 years of experience and postgraduate qualifications from Harvard Business School and Heriot-Watt in the UK. Again, she is joined right next to her by Herbert Njoroge, also a legal manager at PwC Kenya, where they also handle a lot of legal issues to do with REITs. And interestingly, we have two panelists from outside Kenya. Let me start with the one next to me, Mr. Festus Akunobera from Uganda. And just listen to this. He recently secured a favorable ruling for his client in a $430 million case against the Ugandan Revenue Authority. Just, you can see the strength of people we have here. I hope we have no one from URA, given that. And finally, Mr. Michael Butler from South Africa, where we are hoping to learn a lot more because they are the most developed REITs market. So we hopefully get to interrogate what you guys are doing well that we are not. So very quickly, I want to hand it over to my panelists. Maybe let me start with the Kenyans first, because charity begins at home. Just describe very briefly what your organization does here in Kenya and what has been your input generally towards REIT.
Thank you. I hope you can all hear me. Yeah, I mentioned my name. I'm Salome Kaiba, tax director at PwC. So we provide like so many services. I don't know which one to discuss, but we are auditors. We audit companies. We provide tax services. And part of this is tax discussions in relation to advocacy relating to REITs. Generally, advisory services. The advisory services are broad-based, transaction advisory, financial tax due diligence, among others, and also legal services. I think Herbert can discuss that. In terms of what we have done on REITs, specifically I can discuss the one that we have now because it's our center of interest. We realize there are several challenges for infrastructure REITs in Kenya, and not just in Kenya, in other parts of Africa. So basically what we have done is to lobby for some changes in the tax laws, mainly corporate tax, stamp duty, and capital gains tax. So we have set up the groundwork for lobby work. We will go into details later on the taxes. But basically what we have done is base advisory work relating to REITs and noting the challenges on infrastructure REITs and doing the ground lobby work. Herbert can discuss on the legal part what we have done. Maybe Herbert?
Morning, everyone. My name is Herbert Njoroge. I'm a manager in the legal business solutions team within PwC. We offer corporate and commercial law advisory services, supporting our tax and deals teams. And one of the things that we've done in the REIT space is to support our clients to lobby for changes around the CMA regulations, specifically the rate regulations, just to expand the definition of eligible real estate, look at how we can look at the lease terms, especially when you're talking about freehold and leasehold, and we look into a bit more of that when we're looking at the panelist questions. But broadly, we support clients with commercial law advisory, touching on regulatory compliance, data protection and privacy is very critical for us, as well as tech policy, M&A, that's mergers and acquisitions, and supporting clients with transactions from end to end.
Excellent. In fact, I want to get back to that point in particular so that we don't lose it, but we'll delve into it deeper. But first, let me skip the South Africans, because you are our big brothers. Let's hear what Ugandans are doing on REITs.
We're hardly big brothers. We, in fact, I think can learn a lot from what Kenya is doing at the moment. So to unpack a little bit about what we're doing, it's interesting that you started the conference with the Kenyan national anthem, which I haven't heard before. And what I found really, really nice, and forgive my temerity, if I summarize the words on the stage, I was reading the English words, it's all about getting your community to thrive. That seems to be one of the essences coming out of that national anthem. And if we talk about REITs in general, look, REITs are a government, it's a tax construct, it's a thing that you register. So there's a lot of government formality there. To take a step back, what is the role of government? If I look at the esteemed government, I'm not even sure the correct title, forgive me, man representing the minister. As a total layperson, to my mind, the role of government is to get its citizens, both corporate and individuals, to thrive. So affordable housing, absolutely, and communities that go beyond just housing. But to get people and citizens to thrive, you need infrastructure. The modern business world is digital infrastructure. I can work without an office. I cannot work without the internet. So that infrastructure that is needed, government can't do it all. Government hasn't got the capital, it hasn't got the skills to do everything that's required in the country. It needs to facilitate private enterprise to do it. So how does government do that? Well, it puts in places things like REITs to allow the government infrastructure to allow REITs. REITs is a tax concept. That's one of the sweeteners it can use, one of the levers it can pull to encourage private enterprise to step into the breach and uplift our communities. And that's what we're talking to National Treasury about, is how do we unlock investment into infrastructure through the REIT model, and what can government do to facilitate that?
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much for that.
Good morning, distinguished guests. Festus Akunovera is my name. I am here from Upmark Chambers. We are based in Uganda. Upmark is the leading infrastructure firm in Uganda. We specialize in oil and gas, mining, power projects, and we're supporting very closely clients in the technology, media, and telecommunications space. So what we're trying to do now is to engage very deeply with government stakeholders who are responsible for developing policies and regulations for REITs. We are currently supporting 2 clients who are trying to pioneer the REIT framework in Uganda, including our treasured client, ATC. I came with my partner, Joshua Biabashija is the head of corporate, so we're working very closely on this task. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So is it safe to say that if ATC REIT becomes viable, it's the first REIT in the market?
Yes, it will be the first REIT, and will be closely followed by another REIT by Econ, which we're also working on.
Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. So I want to get right into it in the interest of time. Let's start with the policy matters, because we have regulators here. And maybe let's start with an easy one. Infrastructure in other jurisdictions can be included within a REIT, but what's the case here in Africa? Can our current regulations accommodate infrastructure within REITs? Let's start with South Africa, because I know you alluded to that fact in your engagements with government, then Kenya and UG.
No.
It can't. With all the value of REITs you have, infrastructure cannot?
No.
Wow. So what are you doing then?
I was thinking about getting everyone to just give you one-word answers, because it's April Fool's Day and it would really throw the moderator. But, okay, so that's one of the things where I was saying South Africa can learn from Kenya, is our capital markets are a bit deeper. We've had REITs for longer, but it's what the rest of the world started out as with what they call traditional REITs. So that is fixed property, land and buildings, an office block, a warehouse, maybe a farm, stuff that is you can see and touch that is affixed to the land. So we only allow REITs in 2 circumstances currently. One is if you're listed in South Africa, so typically on the JSE, and 2 is if it's fixed property. So something like a data center is much more than just a building. There's all the rack space and things like that. So our current regime doesn't cater for that. American Tower has got cell phone towers, and there are various companies having cell phone towers. Those don't qualify because they're not land or a building per the definition. So what we're talking to governments about, and government is listening. In fact, in the recent budget speech, the minister referred to infrastructure REITs. So we don't have it yet. We are busy talking about that, and the idea is to unlock investment in non-traditional REITs, into infrastructure. And because economically, if you think about it, if I own an office block and I rent out flats either as offices or as places to live, apartments to live in, that is, I've got a fixed asset that I'm renting out, getting rental income. It's very stable, long-term, predictable revenue streams. And that's exactly what infrastructure does as well. If I own a cell phone tower, I rent it out to mobile network operators with long-term leases, I get a steady stream of income. So economically, as an investor, it's a very similar profile. And it encourages investment into that infrastructure. That's what we want, because we all want our countries to have the best infrastructure it can have so our people can thrive. So we want to be able to pull out our phones, access your AI instantly, because we're all going to be using that a lot more in work. And I think there are panels later that discuss that. It was interesting in the Davos conference recently, the G20, the CEO of Microsoft was speaking about the tremendous amounts of money, the billions and billions of dollars the hyperscalers are spending on, and going to be spending over the next few years on data centers. And he was saying he wants half of that spend from Microsoft's perspective to be outside of the US, because he's an Indian guy. So it's interesting, we were talking over drinks last night how where people come from influence big business and their investments and what they're passionate about. And he was saying he doesn't want the global south, which is all of us, to be left behind. So we need to facilitate and encourage investment into modern economies, and that's not just land and buildings. So that's what's being discussed in South Africa.
Excellent, thank you for that. We are happy to provide leadership, and you can host us to show you how these things are done. But what's the situation in Kenya? Maybe speak a bit towards, CMA mentioned the new regulations that are coming up, but currently as we speak, can ATC do a REIT in the current framework?
All right, let me speak from a legal perspective, and then Salome will talk about the tax. And so, so the current regulations, I would say for Kenya, it's more of an interpretation issue and a regulatory clarity issue. If you look at the definition of what a REIT asset is versus what real estate is versus what eligible real estate is under the regulations, broadly speaking, it may be possible for ATC to set up under the REITs structure. But then if a regulator or if another stakeholder takes a conservative interpretation, then would probably land where South Africa is, where you're looking at the more traditional forms of real estate, that's land and buildings. And so I would say it's a gray area. For us, our view has been it's important to have some certainty and clarity around the asset classes that are included in the regulations, so that you expand that to include towers, expand that to include data centers, similar to other jurisdictions like the US and all. And what that does then, it tells investors there's that diversification, there's accessibility to that kind of investment, and there's also some form of viability when it comes to businesses like ATC and the rest.
Excellent. Maybe let's not get into taxes yet. Let's first hammer the policy issues, and I hope CMA have taken note of that. But what about in UG?
Thank you very much. So within the legislative framework in Uganda, there is some room to consider non-traditional real estate within the scope of REITs. Specifically under regulations, we have a definition of fixtures. A REIT asset includes not just real estate in the legal sense of the term, but it also includes fixtures. Now, if you take the traditional common law approach of what fixtures are, it includes things which are affixed to the land, but in a manner that they may be removable without substantially damaging the land. So we've done some analysis, some gap analysis of existing regulations, and specifically on that issue. And we think that there's scope for example, masts, telecom masts, to be included, to be embedded within that definition. What would be doubtful probably is the data centers, because one would then have to investigate what's the level of affixation with respect to the data centers when you look beyond the building. So there is room for growth, but I think within the current scope, telecom infrastructure can be included.
Excellent. So it can be done. There's scope for more work to be done and clarity, at least on our part. Just while we're on policy, very quickly, across the panel, REITs in all jurisdictions tend to have minimum free float requirements, things like that. Just 1 minute, describe what they are in your jurisdiction. What are your views on those?
Yeah. So in Uganda, the free float requirement is 25%, and the minimum number of investors is 7. We can appreciate that the purpose of REITs is to encourage investment and to pool funds, to enhance capital pools for further development. So that requirement per se is not bad. But for initial stages of our kind of market, where there are not many participants, I think there would be room to encourage private REITs, which are single-held or held by a very smaller number of persons, in order to encourage market entry. And once the market has established, then there would be room to expand to increase the number of participants. We think that it becomes attractive in the inception to have that flexibility. Even in terms of just market capitalization, if you look at the people who are intending to participate in our market, just the first 2 clients, you can have some flexibility, reduce that number, probably from 25 to 5%, and then progressively increase it as market uptake catches on.
Okay, so in South Africa, to be classified as a REIT, you've got to be listed. So that means you've got to be on a stock exchange, which means that at least, probably, I think it's 20% of your share, no, 10% of your shares must be free float. But what we engage in government with, and have been for the last 10 years or so, and it's now getting into legislation, to draft legislation, well, it's complex, but it's draft, it's not enacted yet, and it's busy changing, is to say, allow private REITs. I mean, think about it. What do you want? You want to attract capital, you want to get the infrastructure, but you also need the skills. So to get the skills and the infrastructure, if you're a big multinational from Europe or US, whatever, and you want to invest in the data centers or cell phone towers or any sort of digital infrastructure in my case, South Africa, you don't necessarily want to list, because if I'm going into 50 different countries, I don't have to list in each of those countries. It's chaos. So I want to have a jurisdiction that allows me to have a vehicle that's similar to what I am back home, so yeah, a REIT, but I don't have to list there. And if I can get that right, so a private REIT, which is a foreign REIT that's investing into South Africa, qualifies as a REIT there, it doesn't have to be listed there, then that should unlock a lot more capital, because it allows people to come in, access the REIT markets, and that's nice because it gets them a modus operandi that they're used to. If they're a REIT at home, they want to be a REIT there because everything just gels. You're accounting, you're explaining it to your stakeholders, etc. It's much more attractive. So what we exploring with government is how do we open up private REITs? And as I say, they've started some legislation in that regard. At the moment, they're looking at pension funds, that sort of thing. We're saying, come on, guys, you're just playing in your own pond. You want to encourage foreign investment. You want to get the best people from overseas to say, I want to put up a data center in your country to service the region. Because we're all competing against each other's countries for foreign direct investment. As the investor, I can choose, do I go to Botswana or Kenya or Uganda? I can't necessarily go to all of them. And I'm going to choose the one that gives me the best return, lowest risk, and the highest ease of business. And that's what government can help with, is easing business. And that's why we're talking on the REIT space, and our National Treasury is very, very keen on that. So that's what we're looking at currently.
All right, so similar to Uganda, we are also at the 25% mark, and also the 7 minimum investors as well. And so we actually face the same challenges as Uganda. You're looking at new and small market entrants now, wondering how to comply with those requirements, especially if, again, you're looking at just having a single investor in your REIT setup. And then, of course, we have a few more REITs that have been listed from a Kenyan perspective, but again, they still need to grow that awareness. So that means if you're a new entrant in this market, then you'll still struggle to probably also meet that 7 investors threshold.
Okay, so thank you for that. So very quickly, I want then us to proceed towards tax issues, because I think those are at least in Kenya, those are the problematic ones more than the policy side. And this is where I want to now bring in Salome. So there are 2 things here. Here in Kenya, when in any REIT conference, you'll always hear stamp duty being mentioned. But there are other tax impediments, and those are corporate gains tax and corporate income tax that are also problematic at REIT formation. So maybe very briefly, Salome, just describe to us what these issues are, at least for the audience to understand.
Thank you. When we were presenting at the National Treasury, or to the National Treasury, one of the questions they asked us is why the uptake of REITs has been very low in Kenya. They were asking, another question they asked, there was stamp duty exemption at some point, and even up to that period, the uptake was still low. And I'm happy that CMA was there. They clarified when there were exemptions, the uptake was a bit higher at that point. But we presented some of the challenges, which I can mention, especially for infrastructure REITs. For infrastructure REITs, the challenges could be a bit different from the other REITs. One of the challenges for infrastructure REIT during formation, especially towers they attract capital allowances. So when you are transferring the towers into a REIT, then there will be corporate tax on the difference between the transfer value, the consideration, and the tax basis of the asset, which is a bit complex for non-tax people. But that is the difference between the consideration paid or the market value of the towers and the capital allowances that you have not claimed, the balance of capital allowances, which can be a bit costly for a tower company because those are the main assets. Yeah, tower companies may not be eligible to capital gains tax because towers are depreciable assets, and maybe stamp duty may not apply apart from the leases. The other challenge is capital gains tax. When you are transferring assets or property into a REIT, there is exemption for internal reorganization, but the problem with that exemption for internal reorganization is it applies to companies. What KRA's interpretation has been is a REIT or a REIT is a trust, is not a company. So when you are transferring assets into a REIT, then the capital gain tax exemption may not apply, which could be high for the real estate, the traditional real estate. Yeah, and not maybe infrastructure assets, but for traditional real estate, could be very high, the capital gains tax that you make when you are transferring maybe landed buildings into a REIT, or when you are during the formation years. The other challenge is the stamp duty, because when you transfer land into a REIT, of course it will be eligible for stamp duty. The transferee will be eligible to pay stamp duty. There was exemption for stamp duty, but there was a sunset clause in 2022 that now has affected the rate uptake in Kenya, because all those exemptions means that you are not paying taxes. In any case, you are reorganizing your company. You are not, or your organization, you are not selling assets to a third party, or you're not doing, it's just an internal reorganization. You're just changing the organization of, you're not changing the ultimate shareholders, or you're not changing anything. But then without those exemptions, then we see the taxes becomes very expensive, especially for tower companies, which has been a discouragement for REIT formation.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I think you've described the 3 issues that we have. Now, based on those 3 issues, I just have a very simple yes or no question to my South African and Ugandan panelists. Do you have the same issues in your market?
So for South Africa, I mean, to become a REIT is, if you get out of the JSE listing requirement, which they're moving away from, it's a tax concept. So you don't need a new company. So you can just convert your existing company. You sort of, in your tax return, say, right, I'm now a REIT.
Yeah.
And you've got to meet the requirements, but you don't have a disposal into it. So there's no transfer.
So basically, no. Those 3 issues we have are not there in your market. What about in Uganda?
So in Uganda, we have those issues.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, the idea, the context in which they arise is if you have an existing company which has assets, to establish a REIT, those assets must move from that company into the trustee. The trustee has legal ownership of those assets under the REIT. Therefore, there is a disposal. So whenever there is a disposal, you have 3 potential issues under Ugandan tax law. One is capital gains tax, which is the difference between consideration, which is fair market value under the tax law, versus the cost base, or tax written down value, if they are depreciable assets. Now, we have provisions for rollover relief in the context of group reorganizations or internal restructurings. Those apply to companies. There is room within our law which defines a company to include a unit trust. So there's room within our law to apply the company reorganization provisions, which provide for rollover relief, to extend those to a REIT upon a transfer of assets from an existing operation into a REIT structure. That hasn't been tested, and sometimes when we're dealing with untested issues, there's a lot of sensitization, even of, quote unquote, the tax experts at the URA. So there's still room for some very intricate discussion to try and demonstrate to them that, in fact, this regime exists, and the rollover relief mechanism under CG2 law can actually apply to a REIT. The other bigger issue is VAT. VAT arises again on any transfer of assets. In the context of an existing company, which is moving assets from that company into a REIT structure, there's room to deploy the going concern provisions. I believe Kenya has the same, probably South Africa has the same. Whenever you have a transfer of assets from one business operation into another business operation with a frame of continuity, or business continuity under the same umbrella and structure, there's room to get a VAT exemption on the basis that the business as it was in one entity is going to continue in the other entity, subject to some minimum timing issues on how long the business must continue before it is restructured. I think that there's room again to apply the VAT going concern exemption on the transfer of assets from an existing operation to a REIT structure. Now, where there could be a problem is stamp duty. In the stamp duty provisions, we also have reorganization provisions. But the definition of a company under the Stamp Duty Act does not envisage a unit trust or a REIT. So there could be a problem there. Now, there are provisions within the stamp duty law which provide for exemption for strategic investment projects. And that includes projects in information technology. One could say data centers are covered, but there's a question whether towers fall within the rubric of information technology as understood under that law. So I think there's scope for some administrative or legislative amendment to try and bring that within that exemption.
And thank you for illuminating. I think we are learning tax lingo, but I think the key takeaway here is that even for our regulators, South Africa is the most developed REITs market. They don't have these issues, right? These tax formation issues. So the easiest way is we can run around looking for our own solutions, so we can just copy what is working and we proceed as it is.